Okay, good morning, everyone. Those of you that are here, which at this moment is no one. So I'm going to start anyway, get this recording started for this class, and I'll welcome you to the next exciting module of your bachelor's program, which is we are going to start the Prepress and Business Ethics class this morning. And just to kind of introduce you to what this class is going to cover, prepress obviously is the act of preparing files before printing. So this really, prepress, relates to graphics jobs that are going to get printed, whether it's digital printing, whether it's your local instant print shop, or whether it's a big commercial printer. And just to talk about when I started in graphics, there were no digital printing. There was no digital printing. It was all commercial printing. So I got my first lesson from my first employer. Hi, Lauren. I'm just recording this, starting to record the session here. And so this is kind of weird. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I'm getting some static here. I don't know if that's coming from your end or... Yeah, there you go. That sounds good. Okay, so talking about the course and what we're going to cover in this course, and how much? Let me just ask you, how much print, print work have you done?
What do you mean? Like what? Um,
Interacting with printers, getting jobs printed from a commercial printer, doing press checks, any of that? Um,
um, no,
Interfacing
no,
with pressmen or press people?
no, none of that.
Okay. Have you ever created a job that requires you to prep it for print?
Yes,
Uh huh. Okay. But you've never interfaced with a printer or,
no.
okay, okay.
I just got the file ready and then sent it,
Uh huh.
and then they
Okay.
handled it.
And in that, when you say you got the file ready, were there specific instructions that you had to follow in prepping that file?
Yeah, like certain things to, like just different settings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's about it. Just the settings mainly. Sometimes the coloring too,
Mm-hmm.
changing
Mm-hmm.
either RGB to CMYK, things
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Was that mostly in InDesign or Photoshop or any specific?
No, mainly Photoshop.
Mostly Photoshop. Okay.
Yeah, well, all of it was in Photoshop.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, okay. Because I'm going to go mostly over that pre-press, a lot of pre-press work in InDesign, in preparing a file to be printed from a commercial printer. Um, and it could be digital, it could be offset litho, but in any event, it's, the process is still pretty much the same. The expectations are still the same. And yeah, if Chris kind of chimes in here, I know he works in that field. I know there's a lot of technology that has been developed since the days, definitely since the days that I dealt with printers. But and most of it is digital rather than offset litho. But there's still a lot of offset litho being done, and even web web work, because there's still big publications and catalogs and magazines and brochures that are still being printed on the web or web-based. But sheet fed is mostly what printing is about. So, okay, so what this class is going to cover is prepress and also business ethics. And in the business ethics portion, I'm going to talk a lot about dealing with clients, the business kind of do's and don'ts, how to establish good relationships with clients. I don't know how many clients that you guys have interacted with. And they're all different, but there's kind of a protocol and to follow and a professionalism to follow. And one of the probably the most difficult parts of dealing with clients, especially when you're young and you're starting out, is being able to command a job. And that's really important for a designer, to be able to take the job by the reins and move your client into the direction that you want to take them. Now, I'm not saying that it's you against them, but I am saying that there's a level of respect that needs to be developed if you're going to get anywhere with a client. Otherwise, they're going to run all over you. Otherwise, they're going to just, uh, take you on a wild goose chase. And I hate to say, you know, it turns out to be bad, but a lot of times it does. And a lot of times it sours the relationship between you and the client. You end up feeling like they're the enemy, and they look at you as, well, hell, I'm paying you, so do what I ask. And, otherwise I'll find somebody else. And you never want the situation to get into that, but it can easily get into that very quickly. And so, there's a lot of kind of, negotiation that has to happen, and kind of. But anyway, we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about ethical standards of not just doing business in graphics, but just doing business in general, as far as how you're charging, what you're charging, expectations in getting paid. I have a long lecture in that, because that has always been a struggle, not just for beginners, but for experienced people that have been doing this. I've worked for a lot of, believe it or not, I've worked for a lot of employers that did not know how to collect money from their clients. And I'm not excluding myself from that, because there were many situations where I just didn't want to talk about money. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't know how to talk about it. And I didn't know how to get it. And it ended up where it took forever to get paid on a job. And it also, and a lot of times I got stiffed, where I just simply didn't get paid. So we never want to get into that situation. And there are ethical ways and professional ways to deal with that. So that's a big part of what I talk about in this module, is a lot of the business aspects of graphic design. I really like this module because I think it's one that, we all can do the work. And that's why we got into this field. We got into this field because we liked art. We wanted to sit behind a computer. We wanted to create, artwork. But, we want to get paid for it too. And we also want to get paid in a timely way where we can make a living doing this. Working for a company is what I've always recommended, only because it's a steady gig. And basically, you work for a company, let me change my picture here on this recording. You work for a company, hopefully you're a salaried employee, you get benefits, you get a paycheck every 2 weeks, put it in the bank, you work 9 to 5 or some overtime, whatever it takes, but the pay is regular. And and that's what I did all my career. I never started a business. I never went into business for myself until much later. But when you're dealing with your own clients, and I know a lot of students ultimately want to be their own boss and start their own company, you know, business is all. It's everything. And, a lot of times we learn the art, but we don't learn the business of it. So anyway, those are some of the topics that I want to talk about. And Chris, I saw that you're here.
I'm here.
And yeah, during my pre-press lectures, you know, feel free to chime in with any thoughts, both of you, whatever experiences that you've had. We're here to share our experiences in all of this. But as I was telling Lauren before you came in, is that I know a lot of the technology, a lot of the print technology is, really advanced, and it's changing all the time. But I'm going to talk about this in terms of getting a job printed from a commercial printer. Okay. So let me share my screen here and go over to what I want to discuss. Today will be business pre-press and business ethics on Mondays, and then on Wednesdays we're going to do. On Wednesdays, and then on Mondays we're going to do marketing dynamics and strategies, and that's going to be a really interesting and fun class too, because lot to talk about in that class. So this class assumes in the pre-press in preparing to get a job printed and seeing it through, and just, I'm going to relate the experiences that I've had in this. I was lucky in the sense that my first job, I worked for a corporate graphic designer who did a lot of print work. I mean, well, it was all print work at that time. There was nothing digital. And we dealt with lots of printers, a lot of typesetters, a lot of printers. And from early on, he would take me on press checks. And just to tag along with him, and he would tell me, you need to know how to deal with printers, because your relationship with printers is going to be, just tantamount to what the job is going to end up looking like. And it's a tough industry, and there's tough people in the industry. They're rough around the edges. Okay, no offense to anyone in printing, but anyone in printing will understand what that environment is like. When you step into a commercial printer, the lobby, the sales offices look really nice and plush and relaxing, but once you get down into the press room and once you start dealing with press people, everything changes. Okay. I mean, these people are, they're a different breed. They smell ink all day long, and they know how to get a job done, and they're not going to take any crap from anybody. They are the experts. They will work with you, but they don't particularly like you telling them what to do. But you have to. You have to tell them what to do. You have to, not to tell them what to do, but you have to tell them what you want. And they have to understand. And usually the salesperson is right there. They're the ones that are, working with you. Printers don't necessarily work with you. They do. I mean, I've met a lot of just really fun pressmen, but I've gotten to know a lot of pressmen on a personal level, where I actually, and got the inside scoop on a lot of big commercial printers. Anderson Litho and George Rice and Boyle Heights. We used to deal with them a lot. Okay. So we're done with our InDesign file. And my first advice in all of this is that if you're doing a job, you meet with the printer first. Okay, the very first meeting that you're going to have is with who is going to print this job, if it's a print job. Before you design anything, before you sit and do thumbnails or anything, you want to go to a printer, and if you don't have a relationship with one, you want to start establishing a relationship with the commercial printer and set up a meeting to discuss what it is your client is wanting, whether it's a 4-page brochure or a 120-page catalog. And literally educate yourself on what they have to do. And they will be happy to, they won't tell you all the details, but they'll be happy to walk you through the process. And that is the most important thing. And what they're going to do is give you tips on how to prepare your files, scheduling, all of that stuff, color space, everything that, resolution of images and all of that. And so it's very important to talk to a printer up front before you start a job, because the last thing you want to do is do a job that either one is going to be difficult to be printed, can't be printed, or going to be really expensive to print, or things like that. And you don't want that to realize that after you've done your job, after you've designed the whole thing. So I'm not saying that it should reflect how you're going to design it or your layout or things like that, but it could, there's a budget involved, and printing is money, and it's probably the biggest expense of any graphic project that you do. You charge for your time, you charge for all of that, but the printing is really the expensive part of a job. It is the most expensive. And so that budget has to be established before you start designing, because, obviously all the numbers have to work out. How many pages is it going to be? What paper stock is it going to be printed on? All of these things affect the total cost of the job. And that's where, once you have all that information, then it's much easier to sit down and know exactly, what you have to do, how many colors you can use. Back in my day, 4-color offset litho was very expensive. Not only that, if you added spot colors, varnishes, if you printed both sides of the sheet, you're just adding, labor and cost onto it. And it's, embossing, foil stamping, all of those things are just tremendous amounts of money to get done, let alone the bindery and all of that stuff. So just getting yourself familiar with what a printer is going to have to do, the processes that this job is going to have to go through, and the cost attached to that is something that is necessary. And that's why it's really difficult starting out to get a job printed. It really takes a lot of experience and knowledge to know how to bid out a job for printing, especially when a client is asking you to do something, and there are ways around it. There are safer ways around it. What I like to do is not be involved in the printing, not take my 20% commission and buy out the printing for, actually, I don't have a bank account large enough to buy out printing, even though I get a 20% commission on it. I would much rather refer a client to a printer and have them deal directly in terms of the money. Because it gets pretty scary. I can tell you some really just horrendously, scary stories of some print jobs that, I was involved in, and, tens of thousands of dollars that went into court because people got sued. That is not an uncommon thing. So anyway, not to put a negative light on this, but just to kind of put up a flag there, in the beginning. So talk with your printer, and work out with your printer what you're going to do. But ultimately, when they receive a job, and they'll give you a schedule and they'll give you a time frame in terms of when they could finish that job. And that time frame doesn't always. I mean, do you guys meet your deadlines all the time?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain jobs where it's a must, and those become more higher priority, which
Mm-hmm.
then pushes back the other jobs. So then, it depends on the priority of the job. If it has to get done, it will get done. But if it's something that, eh, if it's something that just a deadline for, no reason just to, have a deadline, then that will usually get pushed back.
Right.
So,
Right. There's a lot of politics in the printing game. Um, well, I don't want to say well, there, I could say that. I could safely say that, I guess. But priorities, yeah. You're promised a delivery date, a finish date, and it's kind of like contractors. They say they'll
yeah,
finish it on this day, but it's not done, and that gets really, it gets stressful. It gets very stressful, especially for you as a designer when you're playing
hmm
middleman between your client and the printer.
hmm
Your client is expecting you to take care of this, and you have to deal with not only your client but the printer that's saying that, well, you got to give us a couple more days, you know,
yeah,
or the soonest we can get it done is early next week. And it's like, well, you told me on this day, and I promised my client, all of that stuff. It's just, goes on and on. So
yep,
that's where establishing relationships with printers is really important. I can't stress that enough. So that you can rest assured that you're going to get your job within, within the time frame that you need.
hmm
We missed a job for a number of brochures for a Las Vegas trade show that they needed all of those brochures up there by Friday afternoon. The printer didn't get the job done, printed the brochures, but by that time, it was Monday. By the time they finished, the client missed the entire show in Vegas, and we got fired. We, as the designer, got fired, and he refused to pay for the job. The client refused to pay for the job. And we're talking over $10,000 print job, and that went to court. So that is something that, we promised the client that we would have those brochures up in Vegas on Friday. Uh, but yeah, printers will always, prioritize their best clients, just like a lot of people do. And when a big client comes in and needs a rush job, then that's the priority, and yours gets pushed back. So you have to kind of understand the way that works, you know. And so anyway, okay. Um, but there's a lot of technical things that are happening. So one of the things, we call it pre-flighting, and that just simply, the term pre-flight actually is from a aeronautic term of you know getting everything checked before you take off. And so pre-flighting is having your files ready to go for the printer. The more the printer has to make changes, the higher, the more expensive the job gets, because they charge you for that. There's a lot of things that have to be analyzed for problems before it prints. And the more that you can have that ready so that they don't have to do that, the better. There are mechanical problems that occur. Believe it or not, some of the main mistakes, and maybe Chris, you can attest to this, but some of the main mistakes that designers or that printers get is the wrong size. It's just simply the wrong size.
hmm
I mean, you would think
number
that
one.
people would know, what size, it's going to be printed, and it's just simply not that. So that has to be adjusted. Other things that are really common are things like missing fonts, type fonts. Everyone has their own type fonts on the computer, and I'm sure you all know that those, especially in InDesign, you need to package up your file. Does everybody know how to package a file in InDesign, right? Do you know how to do that? If not, just please, because I will quickly go over that. Are we good with that, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do now.
Lauren, you're good with that? Packaging a file?
I think I've done it like once.
Okay, let me just quickly go over that then. Yeah, thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that, because this is very important in this program at least, because you know how InDesign works, right? InDesign does not embed any photos or text. InDesign only points to those photos on your hard drive and the fonts that are on your system. So if you just save out a INDD file and you send it off to somebody, they're not going to be able to open up that file because there's no photos attached to that file and there's no fonts. Now, if you have those fonts on your system, like if you use Mac fonts and they open it up on a Mac, chances are the fonts will be recognized because they're Mac fonts. But if you have like default fonts that you downloaded and put in FontBook, they're not going to have those fonts. So when they open up your InDesign file, they're going to have lots of problems with that. So what we want to do in InDesign, we always, before we send it to a printer, we always want to package it up. And it's as simple as, okay, I have a file open right here that's called the Canon 70-200 Final Project G1.INDD. Okay, this is the file, and I would just simply go to File and down to Package. Okay, and in the package, now, I'm not going to go through every single one of these things, but basically what this is a summary of this entire file. How many photos are in it, what the color space is, how, it's process inks. There's no spot colors here. There's 5 fonts that have been used. Links and images, there are 11 links found, etc. And when you see one of these little exclamation points or a red, a red thing, you really want to pay attention to this. If I go to fonts, this tells me all the fonts that were used in the document, and that printer might not have Myriad Pro Regular or Myriad Pro Italic, so you need to make sure that you send these fonts to the printer with the file. Links and images, this is basically all of the photos that it detected in this file. Colors and inks, okay, you can see that all of the colors were set as process colors. But sometimes, I don't know if sometimes we pay attention. Sometimes when we go to our swatches palette, maybe our color space was in RGB and we didn't even realize that. So we're popping colors in RGB and then suddenly, they have to be CMYK. Well, the printers will fix that, right? You guys fix that, right? If someone sends you an RGB, and you need it to be CMYK, there's conversion, they can easily convert that, but you want to be aware of that. Whether you have bleeds on your job, okay, I'm assuming that we all know what bleeds are, and you need to construct your file with bleeds for any images that are going off the page. Color backgrounds, photographs that are bleeding off need to have, at least, in my day it was a good healthy 1/8 inch bleed around the edge. Anyway, once you package up your file, I'm going to click package here, and it says I have to save this publication before I do that, so let me just save this, and I'll just save this to the desktop. Oh, you know what? Let me go back to this. Okay, so what it's going to do when I click package is it's going to copy all the fonts, it's going to copy all the photos, it's going to update any links. So if I had did a last minute change and threw in another photo, it will update that. It's going to include an IDML file, which is very important, because an IDML file is a file that a printer can open if they don't have your version of InDesign. Now I'm using the latest version of InDesign because I just got it installed over the weekend, which is CC 2020. If my printer has CC 18 or CC 19, they are not going to be able to open up the native InDesign file because it was created in CC 2020. So they're going to have to open up this IDML file, and I'll show you what that looks like when I package this. And then it also gives you a PDF file of the job, which is nice because you don't have to make one separately. Okay, so I'm going to package this. Click OK, and you can see it's went through that process. Let me get all this up here. Yeah. And here is the packaged file right here. What it did is, if I open up this folder, you can see that inside this folder I have an InDesign IDML file, an InDesign 2020 file. Now if you have 2020, you can open this file up, but if you have anything less than 2020, you have to use this file. It's backwards compatible to anything, any previous version of InDesign. But the only thing is that if you used a new feature in this current version, in 2020, if I used a feature that does not exist in 2019, then when you open it, that feature might not work. So you have to kind of be careful about that. So that's one of the conversations that you're having with your printer, and that is, what version do they have of the software that you're using. Here's the PDF file, and then these are the important things that it collected. It collected all of the fonts that you used in your project. So now they have all the fonts, and they can load it into their system so that it'll be recognized when they open up the file. They have links to all of the photographs that you used, photos, illustrations, any imported graphics. They now have links to that, so it'll open and it'll show. Okay. Now, if you only sent them this file, then they don't have any of these other things. They don't have fonts or links, and then they can't open it. So that's packaging. And you want to package your file every time that, just think of it this way. Every time that file is going to be open on another computer, it needs to be packaged. Okay. And so when they send you back, if they send you back the file, then they have to package it, send it back to you. So you're just sending these packages back and forth, okay, to make sure that everybody has everything that they need. That's the one thing that's a big difference between InDesign and Photoshop. Photoshop embeds everything into that one file. It does make that file really big though, because everything is in it. But InDesign, you got to gather all of these bits and pieces that go along with it, and the fastest way to do that is to package it. So it doesn't take you any time to do this, but nonetheless you have to do this. So now when I open up this InDesign file, it will open, and I'll be good to go as a printer. So then the printer is now going to look at what they need this file to have, the settings in this file so that they can print it. They go through their own workflow in terms of checking your file for all of those things, color space and size and crop marks, and normally crop marks is something that they don't ask you to put in because they usually put in their own crop marks. But bleeds, they're going to make sure that you bled your photos or backgrounds. They're going to look for all the mechanical problems, which are, again, things like size and bleed, and any content that is on the page that, let's say, might be too close to the trim, type that, you always have like margins that you want to, safe zones that you want to keep your type in, just so that type doesn't get accidentally trimmed off. So those type of things, those mechanical things. And then there's your content problems. And your content problems are things like missing fonts, but if you package, you shouldn't have that problem. Missing artwork, again, by packaging, you'll always have that with you. And then the idea of the resolution of your images. Okay, that's really important. And that's something, I go through that with my class at Valley, and it just happens to be something that a lot of people just can't get their head around resolution. And it's, yeah, I mean, if you're not, they think of it as math, and it's like, oh, I'm not good at math, and but that can be just detrimental to how it prints. And we all know that if we don't have enough resolution in our images, it pixelates, and it's terrible. Now, the problem is when we view it on our screen in InDesign or Photoshop, everything looks great. I mean, it looks like, see this photo right here? Okay, this is an actual spread to a magazine that's 17 inches wide by 8.5 inches deep. Okay, a 17 by 8.5 spread. This photo right here is actually, if you measure it, the photo is about a little over 8 inches wide. Now, if I printed this, this would be disaster. Okay, because if I click on this photo and I go over here to my links panel and I pull down this information here, I want to highlight these two areas right here. One says actual PPI 72, and the other one says effective PPI 72. Now, the actual PPI, or pixels per inch, of this image can be different than the effective pixels per inch of this image. What you want to pay attention to is the effective PPI, okay, because that's what is actually happening here. A lot of times the effective PPI will be much more than what you need in printing this. You don't need, over 1,000 PPI to print this. All you need, for print, right? The basic PPI, that we've used is 300 pixels per inch. So at all this needs to have is 300 pixels per inch. But it needs to have 300 pixels per inch at this size of 8 inches wide. If it doesn't, then the resolution isn't enough. Now, that will vary depending on how big your, Chris, I'm sure you probably print some huge things. The larger you print, the less PPI you actually need, because the viewing distance is much further away. So, you go up to a billboard, and if you walked up to a billboard, I mean, the resolution is pretty bad. But at 100 feet away, it looks pretty clean. But in this case, in this 17-inch piece, okay, I'm clicking on this. This only has 72 pixels per inch. So if I printed this, okay, I'm going to zoom in on this just to show you what this really looks like when we zoom in, okay? You can see that pixelated edge. You can see the text right here is terrible. Now, what would be, at 72 pixels per inch, what would be the maximum size of resolution, size we could print this with, with clarity? And the way you figure that out, do you guys know how to make that conversion? Okay, in other words, this is
conversion wheel.
Yeah, this is 8 inches wide. Let's say this is 8 inches wide. Okay, how much resolution does it need to have? In other words, how many, at 300 pixels per inch, if that's our baseline, okay, if that's our baseline standard, at 8 inches wide, how many pixels, what is the pixel dimension of this image have to be? Right now, the pixel dimension of this image is 600 by 239. See that? The dimension of this image in pixels is 600 by 239. Okay. Now at 300 pixels per inch, okay, I'm going to do a little math for you right now. At 300 pixels per inch, that's our baseline standard. That's what we're going to use as our denominator, okay, because we're going to have to divide 300 into 600 to find out how wide in inches this can be for full resolution. And we could do that in our head, right? 300 divided into 600 is 200, right? Which means that, or 300 divided into 600 is 2, which means this can only be 2 inches wide in order for us to get good resolution, print resolution. This is only 600 pixels wide. And this is 8 inches on the page. It can only be 2 inches on the page in order for us to get good resolution. So that means this photo right here literally can only be about this small if I wanted to get it nice and sharp in print. So let's go the other way. How many pixels has to be in this photo for it to be this big? 800. Okay, well that's easy enough. We do it the exact opposite way. 300 is our baseline, right? We need it to be 8 inches wide, so we would just do 300 times 8. And that means this image has to be at 300 pixels per inch. This image has to be 2400 pixels wide in order for this to print at 8 inches sharply. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's the formula. If you want to know how many pixels should be in your image, figure out the width of that image or the height of that image. And if it's 8 inches, then just multiply 8 by 300. And that tells you how many pixels you need in that image. So if you're downloading a photo from the internet or from stock, if you're ordering a stock photo, or you're taking it with your camera, you need to have an image that's at least 2400 pixels in width if you want it 8 inches wide. Now, if you only wanted it 4 inches wide, then it only has to be 1200 pixels in width. This photo right here, okay, if I measure it, it's about 2 inches wide. So 2 times 300 is 600 pixels wide. This picture right here has 400 pixels wide by 215 pixels deep. So theoretically, this picture, if we divided 300 into 400, that's only like, an inch, less than 2 inches. So this should only be a little less than 2 inches, to be nice and sharp. But that's okay, because it's small. So we don't need that much resolution. So that's what we need to really look at. We need to look at what is the resolution of our image. Okay, now let's take this for example, because this was a 72 pixel image. But when I brought this in to InDesign, I reduced it down in size. Okay, This image was the actual image was 72 pixels per inch, and I don't know what the actual resolution was, but when I reduced it down in size, the pixels, the effective PPI got bigger. Okay, it got up to 142. Now, what we need here, effective PPI, is 300. We need 300 pixels per inch in order for this to print sharp. Right now, the effective PPI of this photo is only 142. That's about half the resolution that we need, which means that this photo can only be about half its size. Oops. In order to print well. So in order to print sharply, I probably can only print it about that big. If I wanted to print it that much, I would need at least 300 pixels per inch here, which means my original resolution was not enough. Okay, so to simplify this, what you want to do is what a pressman is going to do when they do pre-flight is they're going to pop all these pictures and they're going to say, oh, not enough. Click on that. Effective PPI, oh, that's terrible. That's 72. What's the effective, let me go to the cover of this. And I've got this big photo right here. They'll click on that and they'll say, wow, this is only 66 pixels per inch. This is going to print terrible. So the lesson here is simply that this job is not printable. It just is not printable in this condition. Now, this job was not meant for print. This job was meant to be seen on the web. And when you're doing graphics that are meant to be seen on the web, like a web page or, interactive, piece or, a banner or whatever, then all you need is 72 pixels per inch as your effective PPI. Only 72, because that's the resolution of a monitor. So I'm fine, and that's why it looks okay on my computer screen, is because my computer screen only requires 72 pixels per inch. But once you print this, you need to up your resolution big time. And if you don't, it's going to be really disappointing and probably just not acceptable. So we always say that in a print job, we really need high resolution. And if you're buying stock photos and you're for a job that's going to be printed, like a brochure or a poster, you've got to buy the photo that has the resolution that you need for the size that you want that to be printed at. Okay, and that's the lesson here. The lesson is, if I was doing a print job here and I wanted this photo, first of all, let's say I wanted a photo to cover the entire cover of my brochure. I wanted that photo to be the whole cover of the brochure. Well, I know the brochure is 8.5 inches, 8.5, and I know it's 11 inches deep. Now the longest edge is 11 inches. So I need the resolution to be minimally 11 times 300. Okay, 300 pixels per inch, right? 11 times 300 pixels per inch. So that means that I have to look for a photo that has at least 3,300 pixels on the long edge, and 8.5 times 300 on the width. And that's the photo I'm going to buy from stock photography. Otherwise, if I buy a smaller photo and blow it up to 8.5 by 11, then it's going to pixelate. One of the most important parts of printing is to make sure that your photos have enough resolution. Just remember 300 as your baseline. You're either multiplying it by the inches, or you're either dividing it into pixels. So if you ever want to know how many inches a given photo is, if I go to flowers and I go to images and I hover over this, oops, I always mess this up here. Okay. And if I hover over this, I can see it says 1887 by 1419. Now, if you want to know how many inches that's going to be in your layout, just divide 300 into 1887 and 300 into 1415. And that will give you the inch dimension of your image at full resolution. It'll print fine. Okay, but we can see for sure that we can't use this photo as a full bleed cover for an 8.5 by 11 magazine. So we don't really talk about that a lot in school projects because most of our, just about every school project that we give you, it will never be printed on a commercial press. But if it was, then you really have to worry about resolution. Even when you're printing on the printer in the classroom, you know, in Carly's classroom, you still have to worry that your images have enough resolution. And I'm sure she went over this in her class. Okay, so that's enough of that. Okay, as far as resolution is concerned. Colors. Understanding what the using the right color space, and that's simply in your you will see that right away in your swatches palette. You'll see what your swatches are currently configured at. In this case, all of these colors are configured at CMYK values. And when you choose a color in InDesign, and if I double clicked on my color picker here, you can see that I can choose colors. The minute I choose a color, it tells me what the RGB, lab values, and CMYK values are. And what I would want to do is, if this is a color that I was going to use in this brochure, I want to make sure that I add the CMYK swatch and that I'm in that color space. So adding it there gives me the CMYK mix. Although I don't want that filled with that. So, no. Okay. So those are kind of some of the things that they're going to look for, at least the major things that they're going to look for in your job. Okay, then the question is, who fixes these problems? Sometimes they will allow you the opportunity to send you back the file and allow you the opportunity to fix it yourself. That way, it's less time on their part, it's cheaper on the overall job if you make the fixes. If a printer does fix a file for you, and let's say they're very close to go to press, and they tell you, we can make that fix for you so that we don't waste time because we're just about ready to run this afternoon. So we'll make the change, and then we'll run. And you sign off on that and you say, yeah, okay, that's fine. Just make sure that they send you back the file, any file that they made changes to, so that you have a current copy of the file that actually got printed. And that's something, I know it sounds sometimes it's neither here nor there, but when you get down to printing, a lot of times files are changed over and over. You have version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4. And it's at that point, a lot of times it gets hard to keep track of what the latest version is unless you have a good naming protocol of your files. So if they're making final changes, make sure that they send you that file so that you have the latest and current version. Because as you know how it gets, right? You get so many of these duplicate files that pretty soon it's like, which one is it? I don't even know which one it is anymore. So, okay.
Yeah, that's one thing that I feel like we at my company should do more is send back the company the files that we've used to print because we don't really do that unless unless the company or the person asks for it back, which is rare.
Uh-huh.
Because most of the time, what they'll do is like a year later or whatever, especially if it's a customer that we do a lot of business with, they'll be like, "Oh, you have that file, right? Can you just redo it?" And yeah, I remember you guys printed that one time a couple years ago. You guys still have that file, right? And then we'll be like, let's see, and then we'll check, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
there, and we're like, sorry, you don't have the file.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we'll get our hard drives will get full, and then they'll have to take them off and put them onto a different hard drive, and then things like that. So we'll have files that get lost and things like that. So yeah, it's
Do
always
you,
good as a designer to have your own files for sure.
right. Now, do you have in your contract with clients, do you have a stipulation as far as how long you will hold their files?
That I'm not sure of.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's something that I'm not too sure of at all.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that way,
Yeah.
but
Personally, if you're doing a personal job, a freelance job, I would throw that into my contract as far
yeah,
as how long you're responsible to hold their files. I used to do that with my wedding
yeah,
clients, and I used to say, I will hold your photos. I will keep your photos, all of your photos for up to a year.
yeah,
After that, it's up to
hmm
you. I wipe my hard drives clean, and yet I still
yeah,
have them. I still,
yeah.
I still have them. It's just so hard to, after all that work
Get rid of them.
to
Yeah,
just
no,
dump them. But
yeah,
at some point, you're going to have to do that. Yeah. But keeping track, and then I don't know what your naming protocol is for your files. And that's something again that we're kind of never taught. I mean, sometimes some instructors will teach that, or some employers have a definite way of naming files for their business, by job number or uh, but
yeah.
try and stay away from, things like, okay, this is the final and naming
Yeah,
it like final, right? Because then you'll have
that always happens.
so many
Final,
finals.
final,
Yeah.
final one, final two.
Yeah.
Yeah, new final.
So a lot
Yeah,
of people just do VER1, VER2, VER3, and that way the actual number tells you what the latest version is.
yeah,
And that's also something that has to be communicated with the team, especially if there's more than one person working on that file.
hmm
So yeah, file management is just huge in all of this. Uh, but anyway, I'll leave it at that for today. Today will just be kind of a lecture. I don't have an assignment yet for this class, but most important thing out of the entire lecture for me to emphasize is communication with your printer and trying to get with your printer as soon as possible in the early stages of the job so that you establish that, not only that working relationship, introduction, who you're dealing with, and you can call them when you have questions along the way. If the client is saying, we got to throw in, you know, uh, three more products, and you can't accommodate that in the amount of pages that you figured for this job, you need to call your printer and say, hey, how much is another signature going to cost us in terms of paper and time and all of that, and we need to rebudget this job. So you've already established that relationship with the printer, and and they want you to do that. Every printer that we work with, we work with some really nice people, and very professional, and so every change along the way has to be accounted for so that at all times you know what the final cost of this job, because man, this thing can just skyrocket out of control to the point where you know, you have clients that get really upset that their printing cost is so much. So once you do a few print jobs, you'll you'll understand. But anyway, we'll continue on. I've got a lot of other things to talk about, some videos to for you to watch, and we'll meet again on Monday for the marketing class. Okay. So that is all for today. I think I've talked enough, and I'll see you guys on Monday.
Monday.
Okay.
See you Monday.
All right.
All right. Have a good weekend.
You
You
too.
too.
Take care.